Hey everyone, Robyn Openshaw here. Welcome to Robyn Openshaw Bitcoin Channel. I like to talk to especially Gen Xers, but all the boomers are welcome. All the millennials are welcome. Let's talk about Bitcoin. I like to do it in small bite-sized chunks, jargon-free, or if I use any jargon, I'm going to define it so that even if you haven't been in the financial markets and you don't have a career in finance, but you're a person who's curious about investing in Bitcoin, because I believe zero is the wrong number. Not financial advice. That's as far as I'm willing to go in terms of anything that could constitute advice. I think zero is the wrong number. I think that's getting clearer and clearer. I think Bitcoin's becoming far more mainstream, far more adopted. We've seen it go up to the 70,000s, 80,000s. It even went as high as 109,000 at its peak. So time to get off of zero. I feel confident in telling you that. So today what I want to talk to you about is custodying your Bitcoin. You have multiple options. When I first started learning about Bitcoin 5 years ago, I wasn't going to do anything besides get a device. A cold wallet is what it's called. You can buy them. Probably the most well-known ones are Trezor and Engrave. Engrave's kind of the souped up high-tech one. It looks like a little iPhone. And you're going to spend about $400 for a good cold wallet. That's so that you can put your Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, technically, while you're putting the code there, because your Bitcoin has about a 240,000 character unique code, you don't actually have to have that device to access your Bitcoin. What you need is your 12 seed phrases. So, very common thing to say in Bitcoin is not your keys, not your coins. And what we mean by that is that if you don't have your 12 seed phrases, then you don't really own your coins. In other words, you can buy your Bitcoin on Coinbase, which is the most well-known cryptocurrency exchange, and they have the lion's share of the Bitcoin sitting on that exchange, where a lot of people, including big public companies like BlackRock and like MicroStrategy, now renamed Strategy, that went from a $500 million public company to now being worth 40 times what it was because the owner decided to have his treasury backed by Bitcoin instead of dollars. And he started buying probably about 6 months after I did. I've been in Bitcoin since March of 2020. So my net worth from that original tranche of Bitcoin that I bought has literally 10x'd. Of course, I have continued buying. So probably my total Bitcoin net worth has increased by about 300% in the last 5 years when you take all the buying that I've done. So still not too shabby. Nobody would mind that. Guess what? It is volatile. But so has the stock market been lately. So you can custody your Bitcoin on a cold wallet. You're going to keep those 12 seed phrases. Now, especially let's say you're going to buy $100,000 worth or $1 million worth. You're not just going to want to write it on a yellow sticky note and leave it on your computer. You're going to want to keep it in a safe. Some people will get like titanium plates and punch their seed phrases into that because then it's fireproof. These are the kinds of things that you have to think through if you're going to self-custody your Bitcoin. So that's what I did with most of mine. When it started to become a thing that you could borrow against your Bitcoin as collateral in dollars, which are losing value, especially when interest rates are low, I didn't want all of my Bitcoin to be in self-custody. I wanted some of it to be held by an institution that I trusted. So I did a fair amount of research about the different options that are emerging out there. I will say that the vast majority of them have come online recently. There are some brand new companies that are custodying your Bitcoin. Some of them do, and some of them don't let you borrow in dollars against your Bitcoin. If they do, they're going to let you borrow 40, maybe 50% of the value of your Bitcoin because they are hedging against Bitcoin and its historic volatility. Because if it came down 50% in price, sure, we trust that it will trace back up, but you wouldn't want to get liquidated. So they'll let you borrow 40 and some of them 50% of the value of your Bitcoin. If you did see Bitcoin fall by more than that, you could get margin called. I think that's what you call it. But they would give you some time to liquidate other investments to cover the difference. But that is going to become a more and more popular option, because why wouldn't you want to hold an appreciating asset that has appreciated by more than 50% year after year in the 16-year history of Bitcoin, and then borrow in dollars? So more and more people are going to want to do this. Our Commerce Secretary, Lutnick, has already said that the financial institution Cantor Fitzgerald that he's CEO of is buying $2 billion worth of Bitcoin to lend, to be able to go out there and lend in dollars against underlying Bitcoin as the collateral. So more and more people are starting to see Bitcoin as the most pristine form of value. As it is, you can go and take out a second mortgage on your house because banks see your house as having strong value. However, my own wealth advisor thinks that real estate is going to fall by 40 to 50% in the coming years, because it's now 16% of Americans who can even afford to buy a house. So the price of housing has gone so out of sight that rents are coming down. It's now 40% cheaper to rent than it is to buy a home and deal with the increased cost of insurance and taxes and maintenance. So we're starting to see inventories growing in most markets across the US. Some places have seen double digit, as in 10% or more decrease in the prices of homes. Some are holding pretty steady. I know a market in New Jersey that's still having bidding wars. In Utah, which is my home where I had raised my children, even though I live in Florida now, the price of real estate has come down only 1 or 2% because Utah just keeps importing people. It's a lot of why I'm not in Utah. I don't want to be there anymore. It's too crowded, too many giant housing complexes. But the West Coast has been running from Oregon, Washington, California, running to places like Utah and Arizona. So I left. I didn't like the air quality. I didn't like how crowded it was getting. It's like the whole character of the place had changed. Also don't like the governor. So in Florida, we have seen a lot of growth, but now people are starting to leave because of the dramatic increase in the price of real estate. So back to custodying though. You can self-custody. You can also go to one of these institutions. I'll give you examples. I was taking a look at a couple of different ones that would allow me to lend. I ended up going with Swan Bitcoin. They had a longer history, a longer track record. I was asking these companies before I had Swan Bitcoin custody mine. I was asking them questions like, how long have you been in business? Have you had any lawsuits? If so, how were they resolved? Are they still in progress? So I didn't find many of these companies who didn't have issues in their startup years, and that is something to consider. And that's why I haven't gone with a company called Onramp Bitcoin. I think what they're doing is interesting, but they're too new. And they are a brand new company, Onramp Bitcoin is. But what most of these companies are doing is called multi-sig, where basically you have 3 keys and they're 3 different little devices. And in the case of Swan Bitcoin, Swan holds one of the keys, and then I hold 2 of the keys and have them in 2 different geographic locations. So you only need 2 of the 3 keys to access your Bitcoin. So that means that my Bitcoin is still under my control in Swan custodying it for me. But if I were to lose one, then between Swan's key and my key, we could still access the Bitcoin. So that's the beauty of the multi-sig process or method, is that you have 3 different keys. You need only 2 to access your Bitcoin. So you're in more control. The Onramp Bitcoin model is that 2 companies that are older than Onramp each hold one of your keys, and then they hold the third one. So there's 3 different companies who are holding the 3 keys. So I don't have anything negative to say about either company. I haven't chosen to go with Onramp because I just felt like, first of all, really young people running these companies, and that's really typical in the Bitcoin space. You have the cream of the crop 30-year-olds out there as the CEOs of these companies. And I think we should. I think they should be out there, they should be winning, they should be leading the charge in Bitcoin. I would be super proud of them if they were my children. I have children that age. But it was a little bit weird for me to think about having a company led by a 30-year-old in control of 7 figures of wealth. So I haven't chosen to go with OnRamp, but if you like the idea of 3 different companies, each having one of your keys, that way if one of those companies goes down, you've still got 2 of them. That's how they put it to me, is it's like Swan Bitcoin, you're in the cockpit with the pilot. Okay, I've got 2 keys, Swan has 1. And the way OnRamp Bitcoin works is they say you're in first class drinking champagne and there's 3 pilots in the cockpit and you don't have to do anything. So whatever of that appeals to you, go for it. I'm sort of giving you ideas of questions to ask them. Most people don't think to ask what's your status with lawsuits? How old is your company? How old is the CEO of your company? What's the background of your CEO? These are the kinds of hard questions that I ask them. So I'm really curious about the proliferation of custodial solutions in the Bitcoin space, because how solid the custodial solutions are kind of goes to how I feel about Bitcoin itself. So it is in its infancy. I think that we will see this space start to proliferate and flourish. And now we have the US Secretary of Commerce, the bank that he's the CEO of, getting in the game. The Trump family has said that they're going to get in the game. So that product, being able to own a piece of Bitcoin at Cantor Fitzgerald or whatever the Trump family's entity is called, that's not even available yet. But it just goes to show you that there's going to be a rush to this new asset category as Trump has made it much more mainstream, talking about it, promising his constituents that he's pro-Bitcoin, and then signing an executive order to start a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Or I don't think that they call it Bitcoin strategic reserve. I think it's digital asset strategic reserve. But there was a bit of a war in Washington, and the XRP people came in from Ripple and tried to convince the cabinet to invest in XRP. I'm really glad they didn't. That's a subject for another video. If you ask me down below, I'll do a video on XRP versus Bitcoin. I think maybe I already did. And the XRP people won't like it. But I'm out of XRP. When I knew next to nothing about crypto, I bought it. I had to hold it for 4.5 years. Then I cashed out. I cashed out at the top of the market, something like 340, and I'm really glad I did, because I think that that asset is going to lose value and go to zero eventually. I don't think it's the payment rails of the world like we were told. I think that was a story. I think the founder has sold off his shares and has said that he doesn't believe in the project anymore. He's no longer involved with the company. So I think that you have various options when it comes to custodying, but I would highly encourage you to consider self-custodying, because that was the original premise, is that we have control of our assets and there's no counterparty risk when you hold your asset yourself in cold storage. There's also warm wallets, which is an online wallet. And so to me, that's just a little bit less safe because there's still, the internet involved. Now, when I go to use my cold wallet, if I take my Bitcoin to do something with it, I am now bringing it out into the ecosphere, out into the digital world. So the least risk is in your self-custodying it. However, if you're going to do that, especially if you have significant net worth and you have heirs, you have a trust set up, you need to consider what happens if you die. This just happened last year to my brother-in-law. He had made a lot of money in Bitcoin. He was an early investor in Bitcoin. And as far as I know, since he died of a heart attack last July at the age of 52, orphaning his children, his wife had already died. As far as I know, they've never found his Bitcoin, and he left the keys to no one. He told nobody about it. Nobody's found where to look for it. I don't think anybody in my husband's family even knows anything about Bitcoin to even know what they're looking for. So I haven't offered to get involved. It's none of my business. I have no right to be what am I going to go snoop through his computer and his drawers and try to find something that looks like 12 seed words. I've left it alone. I don't know what his net worth was, but he was co-owner of a small airplane. So he had been doing pretty well and was pretty stoked about how much his Bitcoin was worth. And then he died. So don't let that be you. What I've done is that I have kept half my seed phrases in a place that I control along with one of my executors, and half of them are written down and in a file folder at my estate attorney's office. So when my estate attorney retires, I've known him since college. I trust him and I trust his firm, which is one of the big firms in Utah. I trust that when he retires, that my case, my file will be given to an associate who's highly trustworthy because this is a well-known, long-established law firm. That's a lot to think about. So if you are going to self-custody, just remember you don't want to have a time period where you and only you know where the seed phrases are and know what they are. Someone you really, really trust at least needs to know how to access them. So in my will, it's totally spelled out that two of my heirs need to be together to access the place where my Bitcoin is held in a cold wallet, and it lays out exactly what's to happen. So there's no fighting between heirs and everybody is clear on who gets what and how that gets distributed. So that's a lot to think about. Helps if you have an attorney. Most of your attorneys aren't going to know anything about Bitcoin. So I had to do all the thinking on that by myself, even though my attorney has been helpful to me for 30 years in thinking through estate planning. But if you self-custody, you have to trust yourself. And if you trust yourself, you have to realize that eventually you might get dementia. Eventually you might forget stuff. So it has to be recorded, and you have to think through sort of the chain of custody and what happens to it if something happens to you, if something happens to you physically or mentally, or if you were to die. So you can decide that's not for me. I don't want to do that. That stresses me out. And then you are left with solutions like Swan Bitcoin and Onramp Bitcoin. Nothing wrong with those solutions. I think they're going to become more and more common. And honestly, all four of my children own some Bitcoin, and they're all just sitting in an account on Coinbase because I don't feel to take on manhandling my four children into getting them to put it on a cold wallet and then remember their 12 seed phrases. So I have trusted Coinbase enough to just let my kids leave their Bitcoin on it. So people ask me what's the difference between the exchanges. These are big companies, and none of us can really see the black box. So we assume that they are safe on these platforms. But again, not your keys, not your coins. You don't actually have the keys to your Bitcoin when it's being held on one of these exchanges like crypto.com or coinbase.com or Kraken or Gemini. Okay, there's a bunch of different exchanges. I don't have anything negative to say about any of them. You have to decide for yourself, but then it's sitting on an exchange and you don't actually have the seed phrases. So you can take it off the exchange and put it on a cold wallet anytime you want, though. So anyway, you can keep it on a cold wallet and you can move it into an institution later if you decide you want to borrow against it. So that's why I have some in cold storage and I have some that is held by an institution, partly just to diversify and partly so that if and when I want to, if I wanted to buy a piece of real estate, I could borrow against my Bitcoin in dollars. So I hope this is helpful to you. I didn't cover every single company. I know that BlackRock, which has more assets under management than any company on earth, just took some of their Bitcoin off of Coinbase, which is where they were custodying all of theirs. And they say that Bitcoin is the most successful asset in their history. And they moved it to a company called Anchorage Digital. I haven't done the homework on that yet. If I find it to be really interesting, I will do a video on it, but there are some other major institutions that are choosing to have this same company do their custodying. So add that to your list of entities to consider for your custodial solution. And with that, please subscribe to the channel. If you want to join us on Wednesday nights, we teach everything that's happened in the last week that you need to know so that you can, if you want, do whatever you want to do all week and just come for the Cliff Notes on Wednesday nights. We keep our heads in this content and this rapidly evolving space every day so that we can teach you about it on Wednesday nights. So join our mastermind. We'll have a link down below, and please do subscribe to the channel if you find this valuable. And I'll see you next time.